They say an old prophecy sleeps like a stone at the bottom of a Welsh island, forgotten and harmless until something in the world shifts and the stone begins to tremble. Tonight, as we peer into the writings of a man who lived 500 years before satellites, cyber networks, or nuclear borders existed, many scholars believe we are hearing such a tremble. It is the murmur of an unsettling vision Nostradamus left behind, a vision wrapped in symbols, half-truths, and shadows. And among those symbols, none appears more haunting, more loaded with destiny, than the image of two eagles circling the same fading sun. One quatrain, paraphrased from the oldest French editions, whispers, "When the great year of trembling comes, two great birds will encircle the dying sun, neither yielding, neither seeing the ground open beneath." Some interpret this as poetic imagination, others feel it brushes against something uncannily familiar, as if the quatrain describes not animals, but nations disguised as wings. It raises the question, why birds, why wings, why eagles? Because in the world we live in, two modern empires have chosen the eagle as their face, their soul, their eternal banner. One in the west, its wings outstretched over oceans, carrying the promise of liberty and dominion, and one in the east, its ancient double-headed vigil, watching both sunrise and sunset, as if claiming ownership of two worlds at once, the United States and Russia. When Nostradamus wrote his verses, he avoided names, eras, and specifics. Instead, he painted the future with creatures, storms, celestial omens, symbols flexible enough to slip through centuries, yet sharp enough to cut when the moment feels right. Many scholars believe that his birds of the great trembling year may not refer to literal creatures, but to the empires that will one day stand on opposite ends of the world, yet cast their shadows over the same sky. Imagine the opening frames of this prophecy, a dark horizon swallowed by two silhouettes, massive wings, spreading across an ochre sky. One wing glimmers with a crown of fire, the other with a crown of frost. Between them, the sun flickers, dimming, distorted as though it struggles to stay lit. The world below watches, unsure which wing brings protection and which brings the storm. Some interpret the dying sun as the collapse of an old world order, an era that has burned too brightly, too long, now flickering as new powers strain its foundations. Others see it as the symbol of a global system built after the Second World War, now groaning under pressure, fraying at the edges where trust used to live. It raises the question, when an old sun fades, do new wings rise peacefully, or do they clash above the twilight? For centuries, the eagle has represented conquest, destiny, pride, and fear. It is the ruler of heights, the judge of winds, the only creature said to stare directly into the sun, which makes Nostradamus' choice of the eagle as an omen even more chilling. The quatrain does not speak of doves, owls, or serpents. It speaks of hunters, sovereigns, opposites bound by the same nature. On one side stands the American eagle, wings spread wide, talons gripping arrows, and an olive branch. It is both threat and promise, force and diplomacy, fire and restraint. On the other side looms Russia's two-headed eagle, a relic of empires, looking east and west simultaneously, as if doomed to forever judge both horizons. One head watches Europe, the other watches Siberia, and both seem to watch the world beyond, waiting for the moment history tilts. If Nostradamus truly glimpsed the age of superpowers, some believe he would not name them. He would describe their essence, what they symbolized, what they feared, how they moved. And in the image of two eagles refusing to yield, he may have captured the eternal struggle between two visions of power, one born from revolution and global influence, the other carved from survival and empire. But deeper within the text, beneath the surface of poetic ambiguity, lies another disturbing line. A lesser-known paraphrased quatrain states, "From the north arises iron wind, from the west a crown of burning wings, and between them the ground quakes as fate waits." The iron wind, as some interpret it, hints at a force cold, metallic, forged in hardships. Rates many historians associate with Russia's military tradition, its geography, its long memory of invasion. Meanwhile, the crown of burning wings evokes imagery eerily reminiscent of the United States, rise not merely a nation, but an empire of aircraft, satellites, firepower, and soaring ambitions. Yet Nostradamus' writings never make accusations. They don't point or blame. They reveal mirrors, not commands. And mirrors have a strange way of reflecting truths we don't want to face. As our world inches closer to geopolitical tensions that feel less like isolated events and more like tectonic plates grinding beneath global society, this prophetic image of two eagles locked in a slow circling dance grows harder to ignore. It is not a prophecy of war. It is a prophecy of posture of two powers, unable to back away, unable to fly higher, unable to land, trapped in a spiral drawn by pride, suspicion, and destiny. Some historians argue that Nostradamus was speaking of ancient empires, Rome and Byzantium, Persia, and some forgotten rival. Others insist the duality of the eagle symbol across global politics is too striking to dismiss. They point to centuries of iconography, national identity, military heraldry, and political mythology to argue that the eagle, for reasons unknown, has become the chosen emblem of nations that aspire to rule. Why? Perhaps because the eagle represents a destiny that cannot be shared. Two suns cannot shine in one sky, and two eagles cannot hunt the same world without conflict. Yet the quatrain ends not with victory, but with a warning, neither yielding, neither seeing the ground open beneath. That final image of the earth cracking open as massive wings overshadow it may be Nostradamus' most haunting metaphor. It suggests that when great powers focus only on each other, the world beneath them bears the cost. It raises the question, is the prophecy describing a battle between nations, or the blindness that overtakes them when rivalry becomes obsession? As the first section of this journey closes, the two eagles remain suspended in the air, majestic, ominous, and bound by a fate neither can escape. Their shadows stretch across continents, their wings darken the sun, and somewhere deep within the pages of Nostradamus' visions, an ancient whisper lingers. The battle does not begin with claws or blood. It begins with the refusal to look down. If the first quatrain casts the silhouettes of the two eagles against a dimming sky, the next opens like frost spreading across a silent lake, cold, still, and yet trembling underneath. Many scholars believe Nostradamus' most unsettling lines about great powers do not predict open war, but something stranger, a peace so rigid, so brittle, it behaves more like ice than harmony. A paraphrased verse from his mid-century texts alludes to this eerie calm. Two vast wings shall cast their shade on nations, splitting mankind beneath quiet dread. A peace frozen by fear holds them apart, yet under the ice, the hidden fire waits. Some interpret this as the essence of the Cold War, an era defined not by battles, but by the constant possibility of one. A world suspended between catastrophe and restraint. A silence so dense that even whispers sounded like detonations. It raises the question, did Nostradamus sense not a war, but a tension so prolonged it carved itself into the psyche of humanity? The symbolism of the eagle deepens here. For America, the eagle soars outward across oceans, alliances, global commitments. For Russia, its double-headed brother watches both horizons. Its posture, defensive yet unyielding. They are wings formed by history, pride, trauma, victory, and ambition. When Nostradamus wrote of two wings overshadowing nations, some believe he was gesturing, however faintly, toward the way these two symbols would one day dominate world affairs, not through conquest, but through presence. Yet the verse speaks not of chaos, but of an unnatural stillness, a peace frozen by fear. The phrase echoes through decades of geopolitics, a peace held together not by trust, but by the mutual certainty that breaking it would be fatal. It was the peace of nuclear standoffs, submarine shadows, coded transmissions, proxy battlegrounds where others bled to keep the giants distant. A peace that felt more like an unfinished breath. But under the ice, the quatrain warns, a hidden fire waits. What is that fire? Some interpret it as resentment, a long memory of humiliation or competition. Others say it is the inevitable evolution of rivalry. As new technologies emerge, new allies form, old wounds reopen. It raises the unsettling idea that frozen peace is never truly stable. Ice cracks. Pressure seeks escape. Fire eventually burns through. As the narrative unfolds, a second lesser-known quatrain reveals another layer. When the day of the two eagles comes again, storms rise without thunder or smoke. Kings of the earth shall tremble not from war, but from a silence that devours nations. The phrase "the day of the two eagles" has stirred debate for decades. Some occult historians treat it as a symbolic sign. The moments in history when two dominant powers face each other across the world stage, locked in a stalemate that reshapes global destiny. If so, they argue, then perhaps the end of the First Cold War was not a conclusion, but an intermission. Political scientists occasionally describe today's climate as a new cold age. A world no longer divided by ideology alone, but by technology, energy, cyber influence, and the weaponization of information. And so the idea that Nostradamus foresaw storms without smoke becomes strangely relevant. Modern conflict, after all, no longer begins with the roar of engines or the march of armies. It begins with silent breaches, deleted lines of code, manipulation of perception, alliances strained at their weak seams. The narrator's voice lowers, reflective, as the prophecy's imagery expands. Imagine a globe viewed from orbit, vast swaths of darkness. Only faint networks of light revealing civilization's fragile scaffolding. Two shadows sweep across this world, one from the west, one from the east, never touching, always circling. Satellites blink overhead, data flows like blood, and beneath the seeming calm of international agreements, ice begins to crack. Some historians argue that Nostradamus never intended literal geopolitical predictions. They say he used celestial metaphors to hint at patterned cycles of rivalry, dominance, collapse, rebirth. The eagle, in this reading, is not America or Russia, but the archetype of uncontested power. Two eagles mean two powers that cannot ignore one another, cannot coexist without tension. And frozen peace means a world suspended in anticipation, but others point to uncanny details. Nostradamus references to northern iron, western flame, kingdoms bound by fear, and the battlefield of No Man's Land feel too aligned with the dynamics of the past century to dismiss as coincidence. Whether these lines describe past Cold Wars or future ones remains unknown. Yet something about the present moment and uneasy calm masked by rising suspicion makes the prophecy feel alive again. In visual terms, imagine the scene unfolding like a slow pan across an ancient frieze. Two carved eagles facing opposite directions, ice etched around their talons, flames carved beneath. A thin crack forming between them. That crack is not war. It is the possibility of it. It is the instability of the moment when peace becomes too rigid to flex. A third paraphrased line pushes the imagery even further. He who rules by frozen peace rules only for a season, for ice holds not the weight of destiny. This is where the prophecy turns philosophical. If frozen peace is temporary, what melts it? Is it leadership, crisis, mistaken judgment, or perhaps technology itself? Tools Nostradamus could not name, yet sensed as instruments capable of reshaping power without a single gun fired. Some interpret the hidden fire as innovation. New weapons, new alliances, new fears. A shifting world where the old rules no longer guarantee stability. The question becomes, are we standing on ice that is beginning to thin? As these interpretations echo through the narrative, the tone softens, inviting reflection. Nostradamus' verses rarely command action. They simply illuminate patterns, human tendencies that repeat across centuries. Pride, competition, suspicion, fear, disguised as peace. Frozen peace can hold for decades, but it cannot endure forever. Beneath it, the fire waits. The fire of ambition, of grievance, of unresolved histories. And when two eagles circle the same fading sun, even their silence carries weight. So section 2 draws to a quiet close with an image. Two wings suspended over a world that does not move. Ice holding them apart, fire pulsing below, and a sky dimming, as if bracing for a moment that has not yet arrived. Not war, not peace. Just the tension that precedes both. If frozen peace is the tension before a storm, then the next quatrain opens the storm itself. It is a storm without rain, without thunder, without any of the sounds by which ancient people recognize danger. Nostradamus writes of a conflict that begins without signal, without trumpet, without a single step of marching troops. Many scholars believe this may be one of his most unsettling predictions, a war that does not look like war at all. A paraphrased verse from his later writings whispers, "The battle begins without trumpet or drum. Fire without flame falls upon cities. Helmets of the north answer with shadows, and the world bleeds from wounds unseen." For a man living in the 1500s, this imagery seems impossibly strange. Fire without flames, battles without sound, wounds the eye cannot see. To his contemporaries, this would have sounded like madness. But to us who live in a world of satellites, digital battlefields, electromagnetic attacks, drones, invisible viruses of code, these phrases feel disturbingly familiar. Some interpret fire without flame as cyberacts, invisible strikes capable of crippling power grids, hospitals, banks, elections, or the very infrastructure that keeps nations breathing. No smoke, no explosion, just a quiet shutdown, a flicker, a city collapsing into darkness. A second line, helmets of the north answer with shadows, is often linked cautiously, never conclusively, to the idea of covert operations, misinformation campaigns, and digital manipulation that never reveal the hand pulling the strings. Shadows answering fire. A war fought not with bullets, but with narrative, perception, and uncertainty. It raises the question, if conflict leaves no battlefield, where do we look to understand it? Narrators of prophecy often describe this moment as the birth of the invisible war, where power no longer lies in occupying land, but in occupying minds. Nostradamus could not name the concept, but he could feel it forming, like a pressure drop before a storm. Imagine the scene through cinematic eyes. A room filled with glowing screens, data streaming like rivers of light, silent keystrokes echoing like distant footsteps. A map of the world not drawn in borders, but in networks, threads connecting nations in fragile webs. A single command sent across oceans. Lights flicker in a city half a world away. A hospital shuts down. A satellite veers off course. A financial market trembles. No smoke, no shockwave. Only silence and consequence. Some interpret wounds unseen as the psychological toll of misinformation. The erosion of trust. The slow poisoning of unity. The way societies fracture not from invasion, but from confusion. When truth itself becomes contested terrain. Nostradamus wrote of confusion as a weapon, of a fog that blinds the kings, which many scholars interpret metaphorically as the strategic deployment of doubt. And then comes a chilling, lesser-known line. Voices of iron shall command the winds, and the winds shall carry war to every doorstep. To some historians, this evokes radio and television. To others, the internet, but to a few, this line seems ominously aligned with the rise of artificial intelligence. Voices of iron, the disembodied intellects capable of influencing societies faster than any army could march. No certainty, of course. Only interpretations woven through centuries. Yet the resonance is hard to ignore. The prophecy deepens with imagery of the sky, Above the quiet earth, the watchers fall, star after star cut down from heaven's gate. 500 years ago, stars falling from the sky likely referred to omens, meteors, or divine displeasure. But today, some see an uncanny parallel to anti-satellite warfare. Watchers could be the orbiting eyes that guide communication, navigation, military coordination, the backbone of modern civilization. If they fall, nations stumble blindly. A war in the heavens that citizens below might never witness directly, yet would feel instantly. Narratively, imagine a satellite spinning out of control, its lights dying one by one as it plummets toward the atmosphere. The world below continues, its daily rhythm cars moving, crowds gathering, ever realizing a silent battle has just been waged far above them. Nostradamus often paired sky imagery with global turning points. The eagle, after all, is a creature of the sky, and when the sky becomes a battlefield, the eagle is forced to defend its domain. Some interpret this as symbolic of great powers escalating conflict into realms unthinkable in his time. Orbital space, electromagnetic fields, quantum networks, arenas of war that leave no ruins, only consequences. Another paraphrased quatrain expands the motif. 3 wars fought without war shall shake the world. The 4th begins with a whisper, and ends with a silence deeper than before. Some see this as a metaphorical sequence: economic warfare, cyber warfare, information warfare, and a final stage, perhaps a hybrid conflict where nations struggle not to destroy each other, but to undermine, confuse, and destabilize. A war fought with whispers. A war where victory is invisible. A war where defeat feels like waking from a dream you didn't know you were having. But perhaps the most haunting element of this section lies in the prophecy's moral ambiguity. Nostradamus does not assign villain or victim. He does not say who strikes first, only that the conflict emerges without the world realizing it has begun. It raises the question, are we already living inside the prophecy? Has the war with no trumpet already started, quietly unfolding behind screens and signals? In cinematic terms, the scene shifts subtly. The 2 eagles remain overhead, but something has changed. Their shadows no longer stretch only across Earth. They now touch the sky itself. Their fight is not a clash of talons, but a contest of influence, each trying to command the unseen currents that move modern civilization. The narrator's voice softens, almost a whisper. This is not the war Nostradamus' contemporaries feared. This is not a war of fire and steel. This is a war of silence and code, of perception and misdirection. A war where the battlefield is everywhere and nowhere. And as the section closes, one more line from Nostradamus casts its long shadow. Beware the war that does not roar, for it is the one that lasts the longest. Under the frozen peace of the 2 eagles, the hidden fire has begun to flicker. No trumpet has sounded, no armies have marched, yet the world has already changed. If the war with no trumpet is a conflict waged in silence, then the next prophecy turns its gaze to something far older, far more fragile: the hearts of those who command the wings. Nations are powerful, empires are formidable, but Nostradamus often returned to the same unsettling truth. It is not armies or weapons that decide the fate of great powers. It is the human beings steering them. A paraphrased quatrain from his mid-century manuscripts reads, "When iron tongues clash in halls of power, 2 rulers shall see themselves in omens. Pride shall bind their hands, and the wounded wing shall darken the sky." Many scholars interpret iron tongues not as weapons, but as words sharp, unyielding, spoken by leaders who believe they are instruments of destiny. Pride becomes armor, ego becomes compass, and nations, enormous and complex, begin to reflect the fears and ambitions of the individuals at their helm. It raises the question, what happens when the great eagles are guided not by wisdom, but by wounded pride? The prophecy's next image dives deeper. A wounded wing. The eagle, the great symbol of supremacy and vision, suddenly becomes imperfect, forced to lurch, to compensate, to fly unevenly. Some interpret this as the slow erosion of a superpower from within. A weakening not caused by an enemy's strike, but by internal fractures. Political division, economic strain, societal distrust, disillusionment with institutions, or the exhaustion that comes from carrying the mantle of global responsibility for too long. In the United States, commentators have long spoken of cycles of renewal and decay, of eras when the eagle soars and eras when it limps. Nostradamus' verse does not name America, of course, but the symbolism is hard to ignore. A nation built on the ideal of strength, suddenly wrestling with anger, polarization, and fragmentation, the kind of internal storms that make an empire vulnerable long before any external threat arrives. A weaker wing means unstable flight, and unstable flight creates opportunity. That idea reappears in another paraphrased quatrain. From the shadow of the faltering wing, a rival shall rise, thinking the hour is his. He sees not the storm beneath his feet, nor the fissure in his own crown. Some interpret this as Russia sensing strategic openings when the West falters, moments when political turmoil or internal crisis invites bolder moves on the world stage. But the quatrain cuts both ways. The fissure in his own crown implies that the challenger, too, carries hidden weaknesses. Russia's history is one of endurance and rebirth, but also of strain, sanctions, population decline, and economic pressure lurking beneath shows of strength. Two eagles circling each other is dangerous enough. Two wounded eagles circling each other is something else entirely. In visual terms, imagine an eagle trying to fly with one wing, injured, forced to tilt, to compensate, to strain. Its shadow wavers across the ground, distorted. Meanwhile, another eagle watches from a distant peak, misreading the weakness as opportunity, unaware that its own claws are cracked, its feathers singed by storms brewing behind it. Nostradamus' next paraphrased lines intensify this uneasy symmetry. He who believes himself chosen by fate shall mistake omen for crown. He who fears the omen shall see enemies where there are none. Some scholars interpret this as a commentary on leadership in times of tension. Leaders who believe destiny favors them may overreach. Leaders who believe destiny threatens them may lash out. Both react not to reality, but to the stories they tell themselves about their own place in history. It raises the question, how often do nations stumble because their leaders misread the moment? The prophecies imagery becomes even more intimate here. It is no longer about empires, wings, or global maps. It is about two individuals, two minds staring into a mirror of omens and seeing only what fear or ambition allows them to see. Nostradamus seldom focused on leaders directly, but when he did, he framed their errors not as malicious, but as human. The tendency to interpret events as signs, to hear whispers of fate in everyday decisions. The wounded wing also appears in a more dramatic quatrain. A great bird flies with torn feather, forced to glide where once it soared. In its shadow, a lesser bird rises, claiming the sky that never belonged to it. Interpreters debate whether this refers to geopolitical realignment, the shift of global influence, or the dangerous illusion of strength during a rival's moment of weakness. A wounded eagle glides not falling, but not rising either, and in its slowed flight, others imagine themselves ascending. But the verse warns that neither bird sees the storm below. Both are preoccupied with each other. Both believe they are acting at the perfect moment, and both forget that the sky is not theirs alone. In cinematic terms, the narrative shifts here to a quiet, anxious tension. The sky is not filled with battle or lightning. It is filled with misunderstanding, perhaps the most dangerous force of all. Leaders misreading each other, nations misreading intentions, allies questioning reliability, enemies questioning resolve. A small hesitation becomes a symbol. A symbolic gesture becomes a threat. A defensive action becomes a provocation. And the wounded wings beat harder, not to rise, but to avoid crashing. Another prophetic line echoes the theme. Two great birds cry out to heavens, each believing the other deaf. The world listens and trembles, for echo becomes thunder in the minds of kings. Some interpret echo becomes thunder as the way rhetoric, strong words, bold declarations, televised speeches can transform into perceived aggression. Miscommunication becomes escalation. Silence becomes suspicion. And the smallest move, amplified through fear, becomes magnified. By now, the prophecy no longer feels like ancient poetry. It feels like a psychological map of great powers drifting toward confrontation, not because of desire, but because of misperception. Pride blinds one. Fear blinds the other. And the world watches two eagles circling closer, both limping, both convinced the other is the greater threat. As Section 4 descends toward its close, the imagery darkens. Two eagles in a twilight sky. One wing torn, one crown cracked, both spiraling in uneven patterns, neither can correct. Below them, the world waits, unsure which will falter first or whether the fall of one might pull the other down with it. And somewhere in Nostradamus' pages, a final whisper lingers. Great powers fall, not from the blow, but from the weight they no longer bear. The wounded wings beat on, the shadows widen, and the sky grows heavy. There is a moment in many of Nostradamus' writings when the imagery tightens, when the grand storms, the circling birds, the trembling kingdoms all converge into a single, fragile symbol. In this prophecy, that symbol is a feather, not a spear, not a crown, not a wing. A feather, hanging above an abyss. A paraphrased quatrain reads, "When the winds of east and west collide, the world shall stand upon a single feather. Two mighty birds circle the chasm, and fate leans with the weight of breath alone." For centuries, scholars puzzled over this imagery. A feather is delicate, helpless against gravity, and yet here, Nostradamus describes it as the fulcrum upon which the world rests. Some argue the feather represents diplomacy, those fragile lines of communication that remain even when trust has eroded. Others interpret it as a single decision, a moment of restraint or miscalculation that decides whether conflict ignites or dissolves. And still others see it as a symbol of the collective consciousness of humanity, the thin thread of reason that has, somehow, prevented catastrophe again and again. But what gives the quatrain its chilling weight is the line, "Fate leans with the weight of breath alone." It suggests that in the final moment, what determines the direction of history may not be armies or weapons, but something small, a sentence uttered in haste, an order paused, a message misunderstood, a line crossed by accident rather than intention. It raises the question, how close has the world come to tipping over the abyss without realizing it? And how many times has a feather, something unseen, unnoticed, kept us from falling? The prophecy continues with an image of the two eagles spiraling closer, their wings beating the same turbulent air, circling the depth that swallows empires. Neither bird dares to strike first, for he who dives becomes prey to the chasm, and he who hesitates feels the chasm rise. This interpretation is stark. It implies that the danger lies not in aggression, but in the stalemate itself. The abyss grows not from action, but from tension accumulated over decades until it becomes an entity of its own, widening beneath the eagle's paths. Some historians compare this to the precariousness of deterrence theory, global stability built not on peace, but on mutual fear, a system where neither eagle can afford to dive, and yet neither can afford to drift, a balance so fragile that it might depend, indeed, on a feather. Another quatrain deepens the metaphor. He who sees the abyss shall tremble, yet in trembling finds wisdom. He who denies the abyss shall step into it blind. In other words, awareness becomes salvation. Denial becomes danger. Perhaps Nostradamus is not predicting that the two eagles will fall, but warning us that only recognition of the abyss prevents the plunge. For some interpreters, the feather also carries a more hopeful meaning. In ancient symbolism, a feather often represents truth, justice, or divine balance. In Egyptian mythology, the soul of the dead was weighed against the feather of Matif. The soul was heavier, it was consumed. If lighter, it entered paradise. Many believe Nostradamus, well read in classical and esoteric traditions, may have drawn from this imagery. The feather becomes not merely fragility, but judgment, a test of whether humanity has learned anything from its past descent toward ruin. And then comes one of the most enigmatic lines attributed to his late prophecies. The world saved not by throne nor general, but by the one unseen who turns the wind. Some interpret this unseen figure as a diplomat, a mediator, or a nation not aligned with either eagle, one that intervenes quietly when tensions crest. Others think of natural events, crises that force rival nations to momentarily put aside their feud. And a few see it as something spiritual or symbolic, the unseen influence of collective intuition, steering humanity away from its own darker instincts. The prophecy does not say whether the feather falls. It does not say whether the eagles collide. Instead, it offers a final image, almost tender in its ambiguity. When the wings grow tired of the circling, and the abyss grows weary of waiting, a soft dawn shall rise upon the earth, born not of victory, but remembrance. Remembrance. The memory of how close the fall was, the echo of how easily the feather could have tipped the world into darkness. So as this final section settles, the pace eases, the imagery softens, the storm quiets. Picture the two great eagles at dusk, their silhouettes dimming against a sky no longer filled with fire or frost, but with a muted, gentle glow. The abyss below does not vanish, but its edges blur, softened by distance. And above it, the feather drifts, not dropping, not rising, simply floating, held aloft by currents too subtle to see. Perhaps Nostradamus intended this to remind us that history is fragile, yet endlessly adaptable. That empires may clash, leaders may falter, and prophecies may stir the imagination, but humanity possesses an instinct, buried beneath fear and ambition, that leans towards survival. Imagine the camera slowly pulling back from the two eagles. Their circling slows, then widens, then steadies into a calmer rhythm. Not brothers, not enemies. Simply two beings learning to occupy the same sky without tearing it apart. Below them, the world exhales. Cities continue their quiet glow. Oceans move in patient tides. Life resumes its familiar pulse. And the feather, that impossibly delicate hinge of fate, remains suspended, light, steady, unbroken. Some say prophecies are warnings, others say they are mirrors, but perhaps, in this final moment, they are lanterns guiding us, not toward fear, but toward awareness. The abyss remains. The eagles remain, the feather remains, and so do we. The screen dims, the music softens, a final whisper lingers. Stay awake, stay aware, stay connected.